The government has just been grilled in the Senate over housing, and what came out should make every Aussie furious.
In case you missed it, this is what we've delivered already in 2026.
And that's why nobody takes them seriously on the economy anymore.
We're getting negative growth projected. That's not good, is it?
It's not solving a supply problem.
I think people are only going to get angrier in this country if they're gaslit into thinking that the economy is okay.
Has anyone been fired for wasting $96 million of taxpayer money?
We are actually in a really good position.
Hey guys, it's Scott here, and I want you to understand something, because this isn't political theatre and it's not some routine parliamentary noise. What happened in the Senate this week you need to know about, and it was an inquiry that ripped straight through the government's housing narrative, and it has exposed things that have never been said this clearly, this publicly, or this bluntly before. For years, we've been told the same story, that the government is spending billions, that there's a plan, that housing supply is being fixed, that affordability is going to be tackled. And then, in this Senate hearing, all of that got put under the microscope. And when the questions started coming, the answers did not appear. What you saw instead was evasion, reductions, documents hidden from the Senate, and an agency that couldn't even explain how many homes it had actually delivered. And this isn't some fringe committee. This was a formal Senate inquiry into Housing Australia, the agency responsible for fixing the housing crisis. The same agency the government keeps pointing to every time house prices rise and rents explode. By the end of this hearing, it became painfully clear that the problem isn't just that housing is broken. It's that the people in charge of fixing it don't appear to know what they're doing, don't want to be transparent, and in some cases are actively making things worse. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what was revealed in the Senate in plain English. I'll explain how the government is spending tens of billions, why fewer homes are being built, how they're competing against Aussies in the housing market, and why first home buyers and renters are being squeezed harder than ever. Because once you see how all of this fits together, you actually cannot unsee it. Now, if you want property and the economy explained without spin, subscribe and hit the bell. I do these videos every single day, and I do all the research so that you don't have to do it. Okay, so since being elected, the government has committed around $80 billion to housing.
Performance of the agency that is charged with the expending the government's funds on behalf of the taxpayers, I think requires serious investigation. The ministers of the Albanese government regularly brag about how much money they're spending on housing. Now, according to the MyEFO documents, it is now up to $80 billion.
That is taxpayer money, your money. And with that kind of money on the table, you would expect two things to be true. You would expect actual housing supply to be rising, and you would expect the government to be able to clearly tell you what you got for your money. This is not what happened in this Senate hearing. Because when senators pushed for the most basic accountability question, how many homes has Housing Australia actually delivered, the answer was basically a fog. It was vague, it was evasive, and it was, we'll take it on notice. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because this is the agency that keeps getting held up as the government's big solution to the housing crisis. So if it didn't already boil your blood that they couldn't give Aussies a clear number on delivery, this next part will. Instead of building new housing supply at scale, Housing Australia has been buying existing properties, including off-the-plan homes. Homes that were going to be sold to everyday Aussies trying to enter the market. Homes that were meant to be someone's first shot at getting out of the rent trap. And I don't mean buying in some small harmless way. I mean the government is literally stepping into the market with taxpayer money and competing against the same Aussies they claim they are trying to help. Let me make this real. I know a developer who had a project lined up in the outer suburbs. Hundreds of new houses planned, aimed at first home buyers, priced roughly in that 700 to 800K range. These were not luxury homes. This is the kind of product families stretch for, the kind of product that gives people a chance. And right as those homes were about to be sold, the government came in and outbid everyone. This is madness. So imagine you're a first home buyer. You've saved, you've cut spending, you're trying to get a foot in the door. You show up thinking you're competing with other buyers, investors, banker mum and dad, people who already have equity. There's already a lot of competition there for you. And then the government, your government, turns up and basically says, nope, we will buy these instead of you. And do you know why this is so infuriating? Because they can dress it up however they want, but the effect is very obvious. Instead of increasing supply, they're taking stock that would have been available to the public and absorbing it using taxpayer money so they can later point to a headline and say, look, we're doing housing. That's not building supply. That's reshuffling stock and calling it a solution. And if you want the darkest part of all of this, when the government outbids the market, it doesn't just lock you out. It pushes the price up. It tells the developer, don't worry about affordability because we'll pay whatever it takes. We've got taxpayer money here. It's not our money. We didn't work for it. We collected it. And once that becomes the behavior, what do you think happens to prices across the whole market? They climb. So the same government that says it is fixing affordability is actively doing something that can make affordability worse. Now let's take that scandal and let's layer it on top of what they're spending and how they're spending it and why it's getting even uglier. Now, according to the documents raised in the Senate, the government is on track to spend around $80 billion on housing since coming to power. That is nation-shaping money. Imagine what we could do with that money. And yet, despite that level of spending, housing output has actually gone backwards. Let that sink in. More money going out the door, fewer homes coming out the other end. What made the hearing even more disturbing was the total lack of transparency around how this money is being spent. Now, senators asked for clarity around build costs, subsidies, and payments to private partners, and what they ran into was secrecy. Key documents were redacted, line-by-line figures were withheld, even reports commissioned with taxpayer money were kept hidden. So you've got Aussies being told, trust us, we're fixing housing, while the same Aussies are denied basic visibility into how tens of billions of dollars are being used. Remember, there was a huge scam in NDIS. Who's to say this is not any different? And when governments start hiding numbers instead of explaining them, it's usually because the numbers don't tell a story they want you to see. Which brings us to the next part that should worry every single taxpayer. Here's where the picture gets even uglier. We heard in the Senate that while the average cost to build a home in Australia is closer to $500,000, there are cases where this agency is spending around $1.3 million per home.
It's spending, in some cases, $1.3 million of taxpayer funds on a single house. Now, the average cost to build a new house is about 500 grand. So the first question is, why are taxpayers funding massively gold-plated housing projects?
I want you to stop and think about that for a second. How many Aussies do you know who can afford to go out and get a 1.3 million home? Because that's the price point the government is operating at while claiming it's solving an affordability crisis. And it doesn't stop there. The agency has burned through tens of millions of dollars in consultants, despite this being the same government that loves to complain about consultant waste. At the same time, the organization itself is bleeding staff. About a quarter of its workforce leaves every year, and most of its senior executives have already walked out. So you've got an agency that's unstable, hemorrhaging experience, outsourcing core decisions, and spending eye-watering sums per home, all while insisting it's the answer to Australia's housing crisis. That is not a solution. This is a warning sign. And then comes the policy that was supposed to help first-home buyers, but may end up hurting them the most. When you put all of this together, the Senate hearing wasn't just uncomfortable, it was damning. An agency spending tens of billions without clear outcomes, a government competing against its own citizens in the housing market, homes costing more than most Aussies could ever afford, consultants everywhere cashing in, documents redacted, answers deferred, and all of this while rents are exploding, house prices remain out of reach, mortgage repayments are higher, and households are already under enormous pressure. This is what happens when housing policy becomes about optics instead of outcomes. And that's why this inquiry matters, because at some point, someone has to ask the hard questions. Someone has to force transparency. Someone has to say, this is not working. Because if this continues, the damage won't just be political, it will be structural, and Aussies will be paying for it for decades. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The housing crisis isn't getting worse because Aussies aren't trying hard enough. It's getting worse because the system designed to fix it is failing at the most basic level. More money, fewer homes, higher prices, less transparency. That's not reform, that is mismanagement. The question now is simple. Who is going to hold the government accountable before the damage becomes permanent? Let me know what you think. Does this feel like a government fixing housing or a government completely out of its depth? And if you want these breakdowns without the spin, subscribe and hit the bell. I'll keep pulling this apart because someone has to do it. This is your daily property update. Every single day I do a video on property and the economy. I do all the research in one place so you don't have to, so that you can be a property insider. I'll see you at the next video.